Welcome, Whitney. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Kirian Suarez, President and CEO of Equity in the Center, and I am pleased to welcome our longtime friend and partner, Whitney Parnell, who is President and CEO of Service Never Sleeps. We are here today to talk about her new book, which dropped on Tuesday. So before we start a little back and forth in Q&A, I'm going to toss it to you, Whitney, and ask you to introduce yourself, share the title and the inspiration for your book, and then we can dive in. I'm so glad you chose to join us during this your first week of publication.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kay. It is so special to be with you all. My name is Whitney Parnell. My pronouns are she, her. And as Kay said, I am the founder and CEO of Service Never Sleeps. And I actually just have to name the book dropped. My book, Breathing Out Ruminations of a Millennial Black Woman, just dropped a couple of days ago. So this is actually my first engagement about the book since it's published. And I have to say, it is really special to be holding space specifically with you about this, Kate. Not just because Equity in the Center is just such a respectable organization in equity, but because you've been alongside me in this 8 years long journey of writing the book to the years of trying to get it published, which is a whole separate story, to now being here. It's just really special to be talking about this book with you in particular.
Well, thank you for the honor of joining us this week. And last night, I was trying to remember how long it had been that you've been working on the book, because it has been quite a journey. Pleased to have been along for the ride, during which time you also gifted me this fabulous Black History Month hoodie. Which I wanted to make sure I wore today. But it has been quite a journey. We've had the opportunity to collaborate through Equity in the Center. We were able to co-author an article together, thanks to the invitation of Cindy Suarez a couple of years ago now. So pleased and proud of your first book. So I'm going to start with a question that builds on the title. So what does it mean to breathe out within the context of anti-racism work, especially for Black women? I know we've talked a lot about this generally, but specifically, what do you mean by breathing out?
Thank you. And I will be honest with you. I was real close to calling this like exhalation, but I did not want to take away from our movie, Waiting to Exhale, and what that means for Black women. That needed to have its own space there. And so breathing out was a synonym that felt appropriate. And I started writing this book as a way to process my experience as a counter protester in Charlottesville against that white supremacist mess on that terrible day of August 12th, 2017, because I wasn't really talking to anybody about it. And it's a challenge for me to breathe out and talk openly, especially about things that are tough for me. And I think there are systemic implications behind that. But very quickly, as I was really processing that and writing that, I was tying in the systemic implications of white supremacy and racism in life. And it just became an active reflection about the work that I was doing, the life that I had lived. And so these weekly writing sessions really evolved into tying in what was happening in real time, a lot of which was my work, which was doing allyship trainings. And it's really interesting because as I think about your question about what does it mean to breathe out, I think about how this writing process for me helped me breathe out more publicly. Like I think about what the way that I did our allyship trainings before writing this book, and I noticed how breathing out on paper helped me to be less censored, rather more honest. My tone became more authentic with how I talked about this work. And I think people have even noticed an evolution in my truth telling in trainings in particular. And so it really became a way for me to release throughout the process. And I will close by naming that society still does very much censor a lot of Black women from being vocal and honest and vulnerable. And there are often repercussions when we do, which is something that I'm still navigating. This book did not suddenly free me up to feel like I am exempt from the hardships that come from breathing out. I'm well aware that the expectation of my posture is to be the listening ear that's expected to caretake and support. And I've faced a lot of backlash when I have been honest and vulnerable. So at least this book is an opportunity for a lot of it to be laid out there in one place, even if it's not necessarily how I move in my day to day, to be honest with you.
Mhm.
And the flip side of that I'll just close by saying is, like I said, I'm pretty private. And so it is uncomfortable for me to be so open in this book, but I knew that it was just important to do in order for readers to get an understanding of what Black women have to carry and navigate. And I think about how getting that from other Black women's beautiful pieces of writing in my journey was so healing and freeing for me. And so it
Mhm.
was important for me to practice that too.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. And I'm excited to read the book. I got my copy this week. So I have many questions, but I wanted to drill down on something you just said about
Mm,
the evolution of your style in
mhm.
speaking over the course of writing the book. So can you give me an example of how your tone or your voice shifted? Because I know you and I have talked a lot about all of these issues. So I've heard you
Mhm.
share a lot. So I'm wondering, sort of, in terms of your public voice, particularly in the formal, like
Mhm.
training and speaking context, what do
Mhm.
you share now that you didn't before? And I know we've talked a
Mhm.
lot about the stereotypes that we have to navigate. So if you could give an example, that would be great.
Absolutely. Well, I'll say three things. More and more generally, in the trainings, I incorporate Black womanhood. And it's so interesting how people have such a response to that. Because now, even as like when giving the intro, I say, look, I'm gonna teach a lot of information and the framework for allyship. I am gonna speak a lot about my Black womanhood, but the stuff is still broadly applicable, not just to Black women. But think about the fact that I have to tell you all that it's still broadly applicable because so many people get so mad when I center Black womanhood. So even that's interesting, right? That I'm more intentional about giving examples of Black womanhood, and people in trainings will have strong reactions to that. But in general, I just speak to a lot of that. I'll
Mhm.
say the second thing is a very particular thing that's evolved, which is with tears. And
Mhm.
I think about how earlier a lot of white folks would just come up to me sobbing during my breaks in particular about how stressful racism was for them, which is so inappropriate for so many reasons. And I remember back in the day, I would be so compassionate toward that. I'd say, okay, you can do it. It'll be okay. I know it's hard. And now I have a training spot on tears, and there's also a section in the book about tears as well. But now I'm pretty transparent about saying, look, if you're upset, take a moment to get it together and come back when you're ready, because this is you have to be able to handle yourself in that way, right? So I am a lot more stern about when fragility shows up. And then I would say lastly, the training has evolved. When I first developed this training, um, I developed it relative to what everybody said that they wanted to learn. And everyone wanted to learn how to talk to their problematic family members and friends.
Mhm.
Uh, and then those people were showing up the most problematically themselves. And so so most of the training was about how to talk to other people and influence them. We've
Mhm.
redone the training where most of the training now is about turning the mirror on self and self work and understanding that this work has to be from the inside out. So, those are some of the examples of how there's been an evolution that I can specifically attribute to just laying it all out on paper and that equipping me to do it more authentically in person.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And we
Mhm.
at Equity in the Center are a big fan of encouraging folks to turn the mirror on themselves. It sounds like a lot of the folks who were showing up for your training, at least initially, maybe they were the friend or family member that needed to be gathered up.
Right.
And I think each of us has the challenge of trying to overcome our conditioning and our bias rooted in white supremacy and in
Mhm.
patriarchy, even as we seek
Mhm.
to dismantle those things. Because when we
Mhm.
say our work is about, individually or institutionally, about dismantling white supremacy, or let's say dismantling patriarchy, our first step generally is to go to our toolbox of white supremacy tactics, or
Mhm.
misogynist or patriarchy conditioned tactics, which is a
Mhm.
very normal response because that's how we're socially conditioned. So it is normal for folks to show up in a training or in a coaching context doing the thing that they say they seek to end or mitigate in the world. And that's a practice we're all stuck in that loop and working on it. Some of us have been working on it longer. And I want to name that because I know for me, that dynamic shows up for me, and it will for the rest of my life, having been raised in this society. So we all need this practice of continuous learning and introspection and interrogation, because we're deeply very well socialized in the systems that we're trying to disrupt and dismantle. Thank you for those examples. They certainly resonate with me. And I think you spoke to some of this in your last answer, but I wanted to be explicit about asking, like, what are some of the truths that you felt most compelled to name in this book about the role or the challenges of Black women that generally go unspoken in mainstream equity conversations or within equity organizations?
Thank you for that. I'd say, speaking at a high level, what's become clear to me after 10 years of running this organization is that leadership does not exempt Black women from systemic misogynoir at all. In fact, in many ways, it's like systemic misogynoir is trying to strip Black women of the leadership that society's hierarchy has tried to put in place for us not having. And so the book isn't just about Black women leadership, though I incorporate parts of it, but the point being that since it's so broadly systemic, it also impacts leadership. And so the two things that I really wanted to make sure I emphasize in the book about Black women leadership were, one, want to celebrate Black women. The world is constantly trashing on us, but we are fantastic. And so I wanted people to take away that Black women can be dispositions to bring a unique and powerful form of leadership based on our brilliance, our creativity, our innovation, our experiences that allow for also profound empathy and care toward others. And so, to be clear, I'm not saying that Black women can't cause harm, nor that all Black women are good leaders, because that's often what I get in response. But also, you just spoke to it, right? Like, there's always learning and growing to do. But I really wanted to celebrate our power in terms of what we can uniquely bring to equity in organizations. And the second piece that I really wanted to emphasize is that society in its current disposition makes it impossible for Black women to thrive as leaders. Kate, you mentioned the article that we wrote, which is thanks to you lifting up three big tropes that we face in leadership. We're angry when we're holding people accountable, or decisive or direct, or, just leading. We're the mammy who's expected to take care of everyone with no reciprocation. And we're the super women who are expected to be able to do all things, save all things, constantly make a way out of no way. And those are just some of the reasons why thriving as we lead organizations as Black women is truly impossible. Alongside the disrespect, the paternalism, the fetishization, the list is endless when it comes to breaking down the systemic misogynoir in place. And I really wanted to be clear about what we are up against when we are trying to lead.
Oh, thank you. Yes, there is a laundry list. It makes me think of, the many conversations we've had, and what you just said connects to, I think, the dynamic with Black women's leadership, but I think this is true of Indigenous women's leadership and the leadership of women of color. Like, we are generally the folks, historically, over centuries, saving ourselves, like saving our communities. So there's that T-shirt that says, like, I'll do it. And then it's like, Black women everywhere. Because historically, for reasons directly connected to structural racism and white supremacy, it was on us. And it's still on us, and it's on women generally as culture keepers and caretakers in most societies, or in most cultures, rather. And when I talk to leaders like yourself or other Black women leaders who are in equity organizations, or in organizations that are seeking to center equity in their organizational practice, often Black women are leading in that work, are generally hired for that work, and are hired for their ability to lead on that topic, on the topic of equity, though the color of one's skin should certainly not be conflated with one's skill set around dismantling structural racism, but that's a separate conversation.
Yes.
But what I find with colleagues, and you and I have talked about this, is we as Black women will often, in the organizational context I just named, so equity-centered organizations or those with another mission but seeking to center equity in that work, we will offer members of our team more than they have ever been provided in an employment context, speaking to compensation, benefits, sort of values-based practices around paid leave, professional development, and so on. And yet it is never enough. It is never enough. So in the same conversation with individuals, I've had them thank me for having given them something they've never received, to which I say, that's what you deserve. And then they'll go on and lean into what it is that I'm not doing and should be doing because it's not enough. So I think there's that tension. And I've also heard from Black women leaders and equity leaders also, who don't share that identity, that folks often don't believe what you are offering them. So when you are offering liberatory practices, benefits, people sometimes don't believe that it's real. Like you couldn't actually want me to do that or be that way. And then over time, it can unfold in the way that I initially described, which is that, well, thank you for this. I've never been able to function like this before. And laundry list of things that you owe me, and that you should be doing for me. So, and I know in now 2026, there's at least 2-year-long dialogue about the tension in workplaces, particularly equity-centered workplaces, around what work is and how to be and do. So I think that is a conversation and a dynamic about what the workplace owes one as an individual and what an employed individual owes the workplace within the context of a contract to work there and be compensated for that work. And there are unique ways that that dynamic in the present shows up for, I think, leaders of color, but we're talking about Black women leaders.
Yeah. Thanks for that. Can I add just one last thing to that? Because I hear you in regards to what kind of applies more broadly, what's specific and deeper for Black women. And I think the specifics for Black women around that never enough piece are then also this weaponization of equity, where it's like folks can't hold both things, that you can be deeply cared about, but you still got to do the work that you're responsible for and paid for. And so this challenge that we come up against, that since we do try to cultivate a place of care, when saying you still got to do your work and be accountable, it's not equity. This is supposed to be an equity organization. And then the other piece specifically to Black women that I've started to put language to is that when we try to then vocalize what is happening systemically at a Black woman-led organization, that when you're not doing your work, that requires then that I got to be more of the superwoman, that, the stress involved with having to carry so much, the harm, the interpersonal harm that's taking place between us, because even though I'm your boss, I'm still a Black woman. Then there becomes this weaponization of leadership, where we're told that it's bad leadership to say these things, because in our positions of authority, then that makes people feel like they don't have psychological safety. So everybody's always here saying, speak up, talk about what your experiences are so that we can make this work. But when we do, how is that actually received? And I will leave that as a question.
Thank you. Well, how dare you operate in your power as chief executive of your organization, or whatever your title might be. I totally agree with you. And I feel like sometimes that's the vibe. How dare you? So thank you for ABC. It's still not enough, and I will not be held accountable. Though the instinct or the need to hold us accountable is always there.
Yes, definitely.
But I will not be held accountable. So that's a challenge I think a lot of us are navigating, and I appreciate your putting a finer point on it. I think you've talked quite a bit about how your personal narrative and lived experiences deepen your understanding of systemic racism in ways that traditional analysis alone cannot. So how do you hope folks reading your experience can then reflect and maybe pivot in their own life and work in terms of how they name and navigate the issues that you raise around systemic racism and the treatment of Black women leaders in particular?
Yeah, well, I'll say, coming back to our allyship trainings, the folks who don't like it, entrepreneur like me will often say one of two things: that I'm so angry, aggressive, which is, so deeply racist and sexist. And the other comment that we'll sometimes get is that our trainings didn't have enough data, that it's too experiences based, which has no validity. And I also find that to be incredibly racist because it's basically saying that our experiences don't matter. And secondly, which is just hurtful, but my counter to that is that that's actually really important beyond the traditional analysis, because all the numbers across society for every institution make it glaringly clear that there are profound racial disparities and that racism is the cause of that. And that the reason why these numbers matter is because of their impact on people. If these numbers were just abstract things floating around the atmosphere, that'd be one thing. But no, this quantifiable data ultimately matters because it represents people who are impacted. And so you get to understand that impact with the qualitative through centering people's experiences and narrative. So I hope that in this book, people can connect to the human that I am and how these systems impact me across institutions, and can apply that same lens to what it looks like to center Black women, hold space for their experiences, to understand once again how all this numerical data impacts people, which is why data matters in the first place.
Oh, thank you. Yes, our experiences matter. And often in the type of conversations you talked about earlier, where folks come to you crying, their experiences matter and are valid
Mm,
data, while at the same time, yours can
yes.
be dismissed because they don't like the way it makes them feel about
Yeah.
their own complicity in a pattern in which we're all caught up, incidentally, because as I said
Mhm.
before,
Mhm.
we too are also part of this
Mhm.
pattern and have to constantly be vigilant.
Mhm.
In a moment when Black women's leadership, particularly in what are we now in February 2026, with the
Mhm.
continuous unfolding of trauma across the country. So Black women's leadership is increasingly and publicly attacked. How can
Mhm.
we better, so pivoting toward visioning and sort of flourishing and thriving for Black women leaders, protect, affirm, and follow that leadership?
Thank you for that question. I have a pre-answer and
Mm-hmm.
then an answer. And the pre-answer is really emphasizing that it is not on Black women leaders to fix this.
Mm-hmm.
I am so tired of being told all the things that I and we need to do to make conditions better for our thriving, when the data has repeatedly told us that it's everything and everyone else that needs to disrupt this deeply systemic condition. And speaking of data, like Erica Hines's Black Women Thriving is just a
Yes.
fantastic resource around that. The Washington Area Women's Foundation did great research about that. What Cindy Swat is, a fantastic leader, led around Black women and women of color's narratives about their experiences and leaders. Like, these are all resources that help emphasize the fact that it is not on us because it's so deeply systemic. So everyone else needs to disrupt it. And so, to your point, Kay, about how we all have work to do, that's not me saying that we can't do our own work to make this as manageable as possible for us, nor that we don't have constant self work to do to become the best possible leaders that we can. But I can guarantee you that Black women cannot professional development, educate, self care, community, and boundary our way out of systemic misogynoir. Clearly, because we've tried all the things. And so the book breaks down ways that people can do that. So that's my pre answer. um, in response to your question about how to protect, affirm, and follow that leadership, in understanding that it's everyone else's work to do, put simply, just do it. Protect, affirm, and follow our leadership. And like we've talked about a lot, Case, start with self. Like, working backwards. I think people, including other Black people, including other Black women under Black women's leadership, because this is air that we're all breathing in,
Yeah.
people need to ask themselves why there even needs to be this conversation. What does it mean that one would need to actively work to follow and affirm Black women's leadership? And, like, why is it active work to do that under a Black woman when it would feel more natural for you to do under a leader of a different identity? What does it mean that it's harder for you to do that? It goes real deep and needs to be personal work for people to wrestle with themselves. And then when it comes to protection, The answer is twofold for me. People who want to be allies to us need to do the active work of understanding why we need to be protected because the experience is so different for us. And so I hope that this book speaks to that, and then let that inform what protection looks like, both when it comes to external engagement, but also within institutions, because that's where a lot of the damage is done. And that there's not just one set checklist of things to do, but it's really a holistic way of showing up that involves understanding the dynamic of different scenarios, and then not just being reactive to the bad treatment, but proactive in cultivating dynamics and settings that can prevent harm from coming our way in the first place. The other side of that protection piece that I just have to name, coming back to self again, is that everyone says protect Black women, support Black women, but are they doing what they say? People are so quick to look around at everything and everyone else, but then not actively address how they're upholding those three tropes of angry, mammy, superwoman that they espouse wanting to protect us from. So I often say that so much of allyship work is preventative work by working on the self first. So how can you prevent your own harmful behavior so that you aren't participating in the very same thing that you're saying you want to protect us from? So I just gave you the most indirect, nuanced answer ever, because there's no checklist or antidote. It's really about a societal shift that's necessary as a result of people cultivating or collectively changing everything that they can, starting with self.
No, I think that was an excellent answer. You gave folks some clear resources, and thank you for shouting out Erica Hines and Black Women Thriving. And for folks who are leaders in organizations, Black Women Thriving is a platform that has a whole set of tools that leaders and organizations who are looking to do what you just said can implement. So you give recommendations in the book. Those are some tools available on Black Women Thriving. And I want to name that the work we each have to do as individuals is critically important in the way that you described. And when a group of people, such as a board of directors, are working in a governance role, there is a way that that introspection can be shared collectively and then acted upon in the way that Equity in the Center's board of directors has supported me. So we put together a short film that talks about that. And I think it illustrates the actionable piece of what you're saying. So your answer was direct. It gave us some clear guidance and resources. And in an institutional context, whether it's a group of individuals or leaders in a governance role or a senior leadership team or an individual chief executive, because I'm thinking right now about examples of all three of those in my work with colleagues and partners, you can recognize patterns in yourself as an individual. You also have a responsibility to recognize and name patterns across and within an organization. So that's what like Equity in the Center's board of directors was able to do for me in navigating a lot of the dynamics that we've discussed, because they, as individual race equity practitioners and as leaders, who I think it was Sean Thomas Brightfeld who said, having been on the receiving end of racialized trauma in an organization, recognized what was happening to me, which does not mean, as you said before, that I was not making mistakes, but what that leaders make, because we are humans, that they recognize the pattern of behavior and aggression toward me within the broader context of the evolution of our organization, because there was a clear pattern in things that were being demanded of, asked of me, that they recognized from their work and then from across the sector. So I think it's holding the mirror up to yourself, but then also holding the mirror up to your institution and having the courage to name bias as it unfolds. Because I think there are folks who have the individual capacity to block bias in their role. For example, if they have power in a board, power as the chief executive, but they still will not name that what they're blocking is anti-Black racism or misogyny or bias. And so there is power in the naming. And I think that's, for me as a Black woman leader being supported by a board, there was power and support in our board naming what was happening to me, even as we unpacked things that might have been done, could have been done differently. That there was this consistent pattern year over year, completely different people and different circumstances and different partners, because the dynamic that you're talking about with Black women unfolds interpersonally, and it
Yes.
unfolds on an institutional level, where
Mm-hmm.
equity in the center is regarded or treated, in my case, in a certain way because I lead it. And
Mm-hmm.
that has shown up in
Ooh,
institutional relationships where I've
yeah.
been completely disrespected in my
Mm,
role.
yeah.
So we all know how this unfolds.
I hear you.
We,
Can I just
oh,
say
okay.
one
Mhm.
last thing to close, Kate? Because I was hearing a lot from you about the importance of support. And I just want to publicly state that one of the most significant takeaways for me in this Black womanhood journey and throughout life, and even more pronounced leading this organization, has been the criticality of sisterhood with other Black women. It's literally a lifeline and has been so for me. And you've been one of the most loyal, supportive sister friends in my life since we started building relationship like 8 years ago, and
Likewise.
have been together in this journey of running organizations. And I'm just really grateful for you and hope that every Black woman has other sister friends in their lives to be there for each other as we need in the ways that you've been for me. And so I just, as we release this book and you've been a part of the journey, and this is my first speaking about the book, it just felt really important to be able to publicly name how grateful I am for your sister friendship.
No, thank you. I am equally grateful because we support one another, and it's been great to have, and wonderful and healing to have space for conversations um, that don't happen in other
Yeah.
contexts. And it's like
Yeah.
if we don't have our backs, well, obviously we would be in the position we often are. And I think you and I
Yeah.
are both very fortunate to have one another. And I know we,
Yeah.
as sister friends in life, have one
Mm-hmm.
another's back. And
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't always translate to work. And I
Mm-hmm.
think
Mm-hmm.
I've been privileged to have that type of a relationship with you. And I'll also shout out Andrew Plumley, who
Yeah.
is a male and an
Yeah.
ally and
Mm-hmm.
was my partner along with
Mm-hmm.
other wonderful people like Erica Hines in launching Equity in the Center. But he's always had my back in his
Mm-hmm.
identity and has run
Mm-hmm.
interference for me. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that is such a blessing. And
Yeah.
so, in the same way, thank you for sharing that. Our relationship has been a blessing. Andrew has been a blessing to me, as you have, on our many deep conversations. And I want to say that because it is possible. And so, I hope
Mm-hmm.
that more of our colleagues will be able to have this type of support from their boards, hopefully, but also from their colleagues in the workplace,
Yeah.
because just one person can make a huge difference on a
Yeah.
day-to-day basis if they are validating your experience, like naming
Mm-hmm.
it, and supporting you in navigating it. Doesn't mean that it can be
Mm-hmm.
interrupted completely or
Mm-hmm.
ended, but having someone
Mm-hmm.
who will name, like the critical
Mm-hmm.
part of naming what is happening for an
Mm-hmm.
individual who, within a system of white supremacy and misogynoir,
Mm-hmm.
is sometimes made to feel that they are going crazy.
Mm.
Having
Mm-hmm.
an ally and a sister
Mm-hmm.
friend or a
Mm-hmm.
partner who will name what's happening, even if it's just between the
Mm-hmm.
two of you, is a profound support. So I'm so grateful
Absolutely.
for your friendship and support, and for Andrew's, and for Erica's, and all of you who have had my back, and my board, of course, a phenomenal group of race equity practitioners. I still wouldn't have this job if they didn't show up in the way that you're encouraging folks to, for one another and for Black women.
Beautiful.
So final closing thoughts. Anything else?
8 years later, Breathing Out Ruminations of a Millennial Black Woman is here. You can find it everywhere. And I'll always say, one, I don't expect everybody to agree with everything, but if you can enter it humbly with a perspective of wanting to hear mine and take from it what you can, I hope that it can be of value. And while every identity can get something from this, a deep hope for mine is that Black women can read this and think, yes, just like I've been able to get from reading other Black women's resources. So I'm just trying to be up in here with all the others, just trying to name the thing so that we can live our best lives.
Yes, and I hope you feel lighter. In the spirit of living one's best life, I hope that you feel lighter as you enter this new chapter of your
Thank
life
you.
and career, having put this out into the world. So thank you for joining us today. I want to thank those of you who are with us here on the live for your wonderful shout outs in the comments. We appreciate you, and deep gratitude to you, Whitney, for your friendship and your support. And I'm so excited for your book to be out in the world. So thank you for joining
Amazing.
us.
Thank you so
Take,
much.
take
Take care,
care,
everyone.
everyone. Bye bye.